They gave him 72 hours. No food, no fire, no radio, no way to call for help. The helicopter that brought him here was already gone, its sound fading into the mountains until there was nothing left but wind. He stood alone at the edge of a pine forest, a single backpack at his feet, a knife on his belt, and nothing else. This was supposed to be a test. A man against the wild, with only his hands and his mind. But nobody tells you how loud silence can be until you're standing in the middle of it, completely alone. He opened the backpack. Inside, a knife, a water bottle, a lighter with maybe 10 strikes left in it, and a single energy bar. That was it. That was everything he had to survive 3 days in a place where the temperature would drop below freezing at night. The forest stretched in every direction, dark and endless. Somewhere out there was a river, his only guaranteed source of water. Somewhere out there was also everything that could kill him. Exposure, dehydration, exhaustion, or a wrong step on a cliff nobody would find him under. He made his first decision fast. Move before dark. Build nothing yet. Find water first because water buys time. Food he could survive 3 days without. Water he couldn't. He started walking, counting his steps out of habit, trying to keep his mind busy so it wouldn't drift toward the one thought circling in the back of his skull. What if 72 hours isn't enough time to get out of here in one piece? By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, he had found the river. Cold, fast, and clear. He knelt beside it and drank until his stomach hurt, because he didn't know when he'd get the chance again. Then came the first real problem. Night was less than an hour away, and he had no shelter, no fire, and the temperature was already falling. He had maybe 30 minutes of light left, and no shelter. That was his first mistake. He had spent too long walking, too long thinking, and not enough time preparing for the one thing that kills people faster than hunger: cold. He found a fallen tree with just enough of a gap beneath it to crawl under, and started breaking branches, piling them against the trunk to block the wind. His hands were already stiff from the cold water. Every movement took twice as long as it should have. The lighter, 10 strikes, maybe less. He gathered the driest bark he could find in the dark, his fingers shaking, and struck it once. Nothing. Twice. A spark, gone in an instant. On the third try, a small flame caught, and he fed it like his life depended on it, because it did. The fire held. Small, but it held. He sat close to it, knees pulled to his chest, and for the first time since the helicopter left, he let himself breathe. But the forest at night is not quiet. Branches cracked somewhere in the dark beyond the firelight. Every sound made him tense, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. He told himself it was probably nothing. A deer. The wind. But he didn't sleep, not really. He drifted in and out, waking every time the fire dimmed, feeding it just enough to keep it alive until morning. By sunrise, he had used almost half of his lighter strikes on a fire that barely lasted the night. Day 1 was supposed to be the easy day. It hadn't been. Hunger doesn't arrive all at once. Creeps in, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. By the second morning, that single energy bar from the day before was long gone, and his stomach had turned into a constant, dull ache. He knew the rule. Humans can survive weeks without food. But knowing that and feeling it are two different things. His body didn't care about statistics. It wanted fuel, and it wasn't getting any. He spent the morning searching for anything edible. Berries he didn't fully trust. Roots he wasn't sure were safe. He found a cluster of small red berries near the riverbank and stared at them for a long time before deciding the risk wasn't worth it. One wrong guess out here, with no help for 72 hours, could be the difference between a hard day and no more days at all. Instead, he focused on something he could control. A fishing line, improvised from a shoelace and a bent piece of wire he found in his backpack. It took over an hour of failed attempts, cold water numbing his hands, before he finally caught something. A small fish, barely a meal, but real food. He cooked it over a fire he rebuilt from the coals of the night before, and it was, without exaggeration, the best thing he had ever eaten. But the exhaustion was catching up to him. His movements were slower. His thoughts kept drifting. And as the sun began to fall on the second day, a new kind of fear started creeping in. Not fear of the forest anymore, but fear of his own body giving out before the 72 hours were up. Cold has a way of getting into your bones and staying there. By the second night, his fire was smaller, his wood pile thinner, and his body weaker than it had been 24 hours earlier. This was the moment. If you asked him afterward what the hardest part of the 72 hours was, he wouldn't say the hunger, or the cold, or the fear of the dark. He would say this, the moment on the second night when he genuinely considered giving up. Not giving up in some dramatic, cinematic way. Just quietly deciding that maybe this wasn't worth finishing. That maybe he could just wait here, do the minimum, and let the 72 hours run out without really trying anymore. He sat by the fire, arms wrapped around his knees, and for the first time, he let himself think about quitting. About how nobody would blame him. About how one more night like this might actually be more than his body could handle. But somewhere in that same silence, another thought surfaced, smaller, but stubborn. He had already survived the worst of it. 2 nights. The cold hadn't beaten him yet. The hunger hadn't beaten him yet. Quitting now wouldn't undo the hardest parts he had already lived through. It would just waste them. He added the last of his wood to the fire, and for the first time in 2 days, he made a decision that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with will. He would not spend the last day here just waiting. He would use it. Sleep came in short, broken pieces. But when the gray light of the third morning finally reached the forest, he was still there. Still breathing. Still going. The third day started differently. Not easier, nothing about this had been easy, but different because for the first time he wasn't just reacting to the forest. He was thinking ahead of it. He knew 2 things for certain. He needed to eat something more substantial than one small fish, and he needed to figure out exactly where he was, because in less than 24 hours, this would either end with him walking out on his own or waiting for someone to find him. He climbed the ridge above his camp, slower than it should have taken, his legs weaker than he wanted to admit, and from the top he finally saw it. A break in the trees to the east, and beyond it what looked like a dirt road cutting through the valley. Civilization, or at least a way back to it. That single sight did more for him than any meal could have. He climbed back down with something he hadn't felt in almost 3 days. Momentum. He reset his fishing line, caught 2 more small fish by midday, and ate everything without hesitation this time. No more rationing, no more careful portions. He needed the energy for what was coming. By afternoon, he had packed what little he had, kicked dirt over the last of his fire, and started walking toward that break in the trees. Every step was still hard. His body still ached in ways it hadn't 3 days earlier. But for the first time since the helicopter disappeared into the mountains, he wasn't surviving anymore. He was finishing. The last few hours were the strangest part of the entire 72. Not because they were the hardest. By then, his body had adapted to the exhaustion in a way it hadn't on day 1. They were strange because, for the first time, the forest didn't feel like an enemy anymore. He walked toward that dirt road with the same knife on his belt, the same empty water bottle, the same torn jacket he'd started with. Nothing about his gear had changed, but everything about him had. 3 days earlier, he had stood at the edge of this forest and felt small against it. A man with nothing, dropped into a place that didn't care whether he lived or survived it. Now, walking out of it, he understood something that no one could have explained to him beforehand. Survival isn't really about the fire or the water or the fish. It's about the moment on the second night when everything in you wants to quit, and you decide not to. As the trees finally opened up and the dirt road came into view, he stopped for a second and looked back at the forest behind him. 3 days. No food to speak of. No fire that lasted more than a few hours. No help, no shortcuts, no guarantee he'd make it out at all. And yet, here he was. He stepped onto the road as the sun climbed higher into the sky, marking the start of hour 73. The test was over. But something told him this wouldn't be the last time he chose to face the wild with nothing but his hands.